This morning, Europe is warning President Trump. Remember who your friends are. Right before Trump left for his 7-day trip abroad, the European Council president blasted Trump for his daily criticism of Europe.
Dear President Trump, America does not have and will not have a better ally than Europe. Dear America, appreciate your allies. After all, you don't have that many.
The president's trip begins with a critical NATO meeting and ends with a formal sit-down with Russian President Vladimir Putin. He already tweeted twice about it this morning, then summed up his expectations for the trip this way.
NATO has not treated us fairly, but I think we'll work something out. I have NATO, I have the UK, which is in somewhat turmoil, and I have Putin. Frankly, Putin may be the easiest of them all. Who would think? Who would think?
Who would think is right? All right, let's dive into why this NATO meeting is so important. First, NATO stands for the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, founded in 1949. It is a military alliance designed to be a check on the former Soviet Union's expansion into Europe. It consists of 29 countries stretching from Turkey across Europe and the Atlantic Ocean to the United States and Canada. All the countries act as a mutual defense coalition as defined by Article 5 of the NATO Charter. Article 5 says, quote, an armed attack against one or more in Europe or North America shall be considered an attack against them all, triggering joint defense by all member countries. That provision has only been invoked once after the 9/11 attacks, bringing coalition aid to the U.S. to fight against al-Qaeda. Currently, Trump's beef with NATO allies has to do with military spending. Members are asked to spend 2% of their GDP on their own defense each year. Only 5 of the 29 countries are actually meeting that goal. When Trump claims members aren't paying their fair share to the alliance, that's not really true. NATO also has a budget to cover common costs, including running its headquarters. And according to the New York Times, all of the allies are current in those contributions. Iceland, for instance, spends almost nothing on its own defense. It has no armed forces, but it does contribute financially to the alliance. And it's not all about the money. Experts say strategic locations are more important to the United States. Many nations added in the 90s and the 2000s are geographically close to Russia or provide a secure base of operations if hostilities ever broke out.
Keep that map up for a second. Keep that map up. Look at, push into where Russia borders the NATO countries, right? You got Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland. Look at these countries. They all border Russia. They are strategically important to us. And you made a point in there that I just cannot underscore enough. The only time Article 5, which makes all NATO countries come together in the defense of one if they are attacked, the only time that has been invoked was after the attacks of 9/11.
When our NATO allies came to support
They went and
us.
sent soldiers to Afghanistan. They spilt blood. Their soldiers died in a fight that was essentially America's because of the NATO alliance. So aside from all the facts you stated, that these countries are paying their contributions, and the 2% in military spending, which is not a contribution, it's a goal, is meant to be met by 2024. So there's just a whole lot of nonsense going on in this conversation.
You and I could call it nonsense, but that nonsense works.
Hey, MSNBC fans, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down there and click on any of the videos here to watch the latest interviews and highlights. You can get more MSNBC for free every day with our newsletters. Just visit msnbc.com/newsletters to sign up now.